All right. Looks like we are cooking with gas. All right. We are live streaming. All right. What it is, what it was, what it shall be. This is JL, the anti-guru. And it is Monday.
The hell was that?
And you know what it is? This is the Welcome to Experience JL, the Anti-Guru podcast. And let me turn my music down. Went a little bit old school today. No, baby. All right. And I've got a special guest. Whoa, watch out there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what the hell, man?
I got this new sound card that I'm playing with. But I got a special guest tonight, guys. Somebody, a good friend of mine, solid brother, Ron Jones. First of all, Ron, appreciate you coming on and taking time out of your busy schedule because I know you are a busy guy and you got jokes, so I'm sure that's coming up.
Yeah.
But let me introduce you guys to Mr. Jones. Ron Jones has been an educator, a writer, actor, social activist for over 25 years. He doesn't even look that old, does he? He's an Emmy Award winner who is currently an executive director of Dialogues on Diversity, which is what we're going to be talking about. So Dialogues on Diversity is one of the nation's premier social justice diversity awareness theater companies. They present performances, lectures, and workshops to colleges, primary and secondary schools, as well as corporate and community organizations. Through their platform, his company has designed, he hopes, to help individuals and organizations address issues of cultural difference in a more open and healthy perspective. One other thing I want to mention, guys, one of the things that Dialogues of Diversity, their creation is the Black Jew Dialogues. I have checked out some of their videos. It's something you really, really need to check out because it's going to make you laugh. It's going to open your eyes and it's going to change the way you think about some things.
Wow.
Ron, I appreciate you coming on with us today, man.
Thank you. High praise indeed. Wow, man.
Well, I think highly of you, so that's how it is.
What can I say? It's easier to borrow money from people you like.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I said it's easier to borrow money from people you like.
Yeah, and I have borrowed money from you, and I do like you.
Yeah, well, there you go. Understand. I know that the credit union is always open.
Yeah, and there's work at the post office too.
Yeah, exactly. Know that the vault is sometimes empty, but yeah. So anyway, thanks for having me, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Oh man, hey, we're getting ready to get into a deep well, maybe not too deep for some, maybe shallow for others.
Yeah.
But, listen, Ron, the first thing I'm sure everybody wants to know is how did you get into this type of work?
Wow. It's funny because this is one of these things that I often sort of say to people. It's like, if you're really paying attention, life is preparing you for whatever is next. And so I feel like I've been preparing for this job since I was a kid. I basically grew up in an all-Black community in DC, but because of my grandparents living in rural Virginia, just a couple hours north of where we are right now, we had an entangled relationship with white folk, as most Black people do. Mm-hmm. But the thing that stuck out to me was that the narratives about white folk, were oftentimes negative. But right. At the same time, the teachers I had at school were nothing but nurturing. Everybody in my family on one level or another worked for or with white people. And so it just felt like a kind of cognitive dissonance to me. And also it was a little tough growing up in my own family, for reasons that I couldn't help. Like I spoke the way I speak, which, right. For some from rural country folk, this a little white people sounded.
I know, right? I used to get that
people
too.
Always ask me, why am I talking like white people? I'm like, What do you think? I sneak out of the house at night and creep up to their windows and listen and just try to, no, this is just the way it comes out. I mean, I'm not
Right.
trying to do anything. So, long story short, I realized I could either be in pain all the time from living in a world that doesn't seem to accept me for who I fully am, or feel alien in a world that, I landed in, or I can realize it's complicated.
Right.
Complicated, people are complicated and they're tangled. And so that's what's driven me for a lot of my life. Then when I got to college, I started doing comedy performance. I started doing improvisation. And with a few years, I was teaching. And then a few years after that, I'm directing. And a few years after that, a friend of mine comes to me and he says, "You want to write a show?" And I was like, "Okay, sure. Why not? Never done it, but don't know why I wouldn't." And he's like, "I want to write a show about Blacks and Jews and take it to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which is the biggest theater festival in the world." And I was like, "Oh, that'll be great. Yeah, all the Blacks and Jews in Scotland will love it. All 15 of them." What? And so anyway, we did it. And in fact, it became a bit of a hit. And we brought it back to America and we started doing it at theaters and on college campuses, and it became a thing. That was the nucleus of the company, Dialogues on Diversity. And from there, I just kept creating new pieces based on either what schools were asking for or what I wanted to write. And now I've got, over a dozen different performance and workshop products that I tour nationally a year. And here we are.
Oh wow. Well, I mean, when I met you, I knew you were somebody different because of the way you, like you said, the way you speak. Because we had a conversation yesterday about this issue where, you know, uh, I grew up very similar to you. I mean, both my parents were college educated. They believed in education. I don't know if I told you this. When I was 13, my mom bought the World Book Encyclopedias. I
Oh,
read them from A to Z.
yeah, I
So
did
from
the same thing. Yeah.
1973, I got all this knowledge, useless knowledge now.
Yes.
But I used to get that. Well, you talk like a white person. I'm like, what do you mean? I mean, I speak standard English.
Yeah. Yeah. It always blew me away when people would say that. Like the first time I ever heard it, it was my first grade teacher in Salem, Virginia. And she said, "Oh, you speak so well." And I was like, "You mean English?" And she was like, "But you say it so well." I was like, "Is there another way to say it?" And I was just like, "This is just an alien ass question to me or statement to me." It's like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been hearing you and you've been hearing me and we're hearing each other and we're all both speaking the same language. So I'm not sure what the issue is. But I later on learned that people had these warped perceptions of, black, black dialect. And once again, it's not that it's not true, but the idea that you would just assign every black person to that singular black expression. It's
Right.
like, okay. And even the idea that black people would do that. I remember when I met my first people from the Midwest, black folks from the Midwest. I was like, really? There's black folks in the middle of the country?
Oh yeah.
What, did the wagon break down? What the hell happened? Like, seriously, y'all couldn't make it to Chicago? Your feet were hurting too much? You just gave up? And it's like I said, I believe that everybody is on a spectrum of knowledge and ignorance when it comes to cultural expression. Everybody.
No doubt.
And I think that that's one of the big problems that we oftentimes really stumble badly through, is that we want to assign our perception of reality to everybody else's reality.
Yeah.
And even when it comes to big cultural groups, that's a dangerous thing to do.
No doubt. No doubt.
Yeah, so I
But
got you.
now that brings me to my next question. So why do you think that your approach is important in talking about diversity in relation to what you just said?
It's interesting because, and I always start with this caveat: my way is a way, it's not the way. In fact, I might just sort of give up and say to hell with it. I'm just going to do it hard to y'all now at this point. But my experience has taught me, especially based on like what I was just saying, is that if you don't treat people like you want them to learn, it gets harder for them to want to learn.
Yeah.
It gets more challenging to um, build cultural bridges unless we work with what I call radical compassion. You know, I start a lot of my programs just telling people how much I love them, you know, and I tell them I love them for very specific reasons. Number one, you are the expression in flesh of the rest of my humanity. You know, you're all I got, seriously. Until goats and sheep learn to cook and hold good conversation, you're it, you know? And so
No,
I
right.
started the highest aspiration with people, which is love.
Yeah.
Um and once again, yeah, you can go down from there. I'm not gonna not love you, but I'm definitely gonna be a little more reserved about how I express it.
No
Um,
doubt.
the same thing is true from my faith orientation. You know, my faith tells me love.
Right.
And so that's where I'm at. And then I go my national mandate. You know, the thing that this country was founded on that we're still struggling hard with was this expression of more dignity for more people.
Right.
If you go to the highest aspirational level of that, it's love. And so I put those three things together to say, I have to love you the way I would wish to be loved. I have to teach you the way I would wish to be taught. I have to see you through the lens that shows as much dignity to you as possible. And all of those words are great in theory.
Right.
You, when you start trying to execute that stuff, that's when people go, I
Yeah.
don't know,
They slide out from
slavery.
under. Because you talked about cognitive dissonance. That's something that a lot of people in this country suffer from. If the truth doesn't line up with what they believe, they just discard it.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and that's a problem that I think all racial groups suffer from in one level or another.
Yeah,
You
and not just racial groups, ethnic groups. People, I mean, once again, that's one of the things, like I said, when I was just a little kid, I would see the way some black folks treated other black folks.
Yeah.
And I was like, you give people like my older sister is fair of skin. She's like as light as you, if not lighter.
Right.
And she got grief for that. And I'm
Yeah.
like, what's that all about? If you're too
What
black,
that
you get
is.
grief.
That goes back to slavery times when you had the field slaves
And the
and
house,
the
yeah,
house slaves.
right.
Because
Yeah,
you bring that up. I don't know if we may have talked about this, but this was back, when Rodney King incident went along and the verdict came back and everybody was outraged because these cops basically
yeah.
beat the crap out of this guy and got away with it. I was going to Winston State at the time and everybody was outraged. I was too. And I remember this one guy, well, I'm going to go to the mall and I'm just going to punch the first white person I see. And I'm like, bruh, what is that going to do?
Right.
And
Get your ass
well,
thrown in jail is what it's going to do.
yeah, he's going to go to jail. But he's like, I'm from California. You just don't know what it's like. And then the next thing out of his mouth was, well, do I know what it's like to be black?
Hmm.
And I'm like, bruh, one thing I do know about white people, they don't break us up into little pieces,
Yeah,
little
they'll slice us up into the ones that they
yeah,
like and the ones they don't.
exactly. Yeah, that might be it. But if they're racist, it don't matter whether you light skin or dark skin, they racist.
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the things that really inspired me to start doing this work on a much deeper level. It's funny you mentioned the Black Jew show because I think that really was eye-opening for a lot of folks when we wrote it. And it was interesting because like the majority of the writing in it I did. My partner wrote a lot, but the big sort of like we wrote sketches, the comedy sketches together,
Mhm.
and a lot of the big theoretical stuff, sort of the overarching message, a lot of that was coming from my head. And and I've always believed in this idea that, people don't seem to understand a couple of basic things. Number one, all these isms, racism, sexism, misogyny, religious bigotry, all of those things are basically just an expression of a cognitive system.
Right.
It's happening in here, and then it comes out here.
Right.
But the mechanisms are not all that different, no matter which one we're talking about. Just the way they express themselves are going to change. And if you don't understand and learn to dismantle the cognitive and behavioral stuff that drives a lot of that, all you're doing is playing sort of social justice whack-a-mole, you know? You're just sort of going there, racism, George Floyd, like Asian people, but you're not dealing with the fact that people have a lot of fear, and people have
Right.
a lot of ignorance, and people come from where they came from. And more than anything else, when it comes to, I basically break, the what some would call the oppressed and oppressor world into two categories. One is people who are shackled by fear and ignorance.
Mhm.
And the other is people who are shackled by pain and disrespect. And once again, this isn't everybody all the time, but I believe that those are the drivers for what makes it hard for the individuals caught in the middle of that matrix to really let go,
Right.
to understand that it's just power is the dictator, but at the same time, power isn't necessarily against you in a way that can't be transformed. And when I talk about this, when I talk about marginalized people or minority groups or the disenfranchised, I'd say that people who basically buy into these hateful and ignorant ideas, they're disenfranchised as well, but they're disenfranchised of spirit.
Right.
They're disenfranchised of conscience. And a lot of times they get there because either their world just oriented them that way, or they are holding on to pain because it's better than holding on to nothingness.
True. True. Because
You don't
you
really know
people
who you
move,
are.
they move quicker towards pain than they will towards pleasure.
Oh yeah, of course. And the idea here is that is one of the great and tragic things that we've done as a country to ourselves. And when I say ourselves, I try to also align myself with the country as a whole body.
Right.
Yeah, I was a my ancestors were subject to slavery. I still deal with the effects and the ripple impacts of slavery, but at
Mhm.
the same time, I have more access and privilege than they ever did.
Right.
Um, you know, um, I might be a black man, but I know black women don't get a fair shake as well as I do. I mean, what's that look? What's that look?
I think that, just my personal opinion is that um we both have our challenges, black men and black women. I
Mm-hmm.
think black women today are some of the most successful, uh, upwardly mobile black women that have ever lived.
Oh,
Uh,
no question, no question.
but I think, I also think that black women use, or maybe not use.
Be careful.
Yeah, I don't.
Careful.
Yeah, I don't want to get canceled tonight.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do believe that black women use their femininity as a weapon sometimes, or the vulnerable, not maybe their femininity, but their supposed vulnerability when it comes to dealing with black men. Because I've heard women say, "Well, you need to understand me because I've had trauma." Okay, but black men have trauma too.
Yeah.
So
No,
what's, what's the
yeah.
difference?
I don't disagree with the fundamental tenets of what you're saying,
Yeah.
but I do think there is clearly and distinctly a difference, because we know sexism is a thing. We know that that financial power leans more towards the masculine than the feminine. I mean, once again, if you think about it, just from the point of view of our lifetimes,
Mhm.
it has only been in our lifetimes that women have been able to open bank accounts on their own.
Right. Right.
And it's
Both.
only in our lifetimes that they were put into the mainstream of the work world.
Mhm.
Um, they got half the jobs and they have all the babies. It,
Yeah, they have all
it's
the babies,
it's it's
but
it's a complicated thing that when you look at structural power, it is almost impossible to say that there is equity. Now, you're exactly right. I mean, Black women and women in general are more successful than they've ever been.
right.
And once again, like I said, but if you go back, if you go back even just before our lives started in the 60s, the idea was Donna Reed. You were a homemaker and that's it. That's
Yeah,
pretty much it.
but that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you have a man who is supplying all of your needs, paying all the bills and all this kind of stuff, and I don't want to say all you have to do, because I don't make it sound like being a homemaker is an easy job. I mean, cooking and cleaning and raising kids, that's a tough job.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But however, if you don't have to go out and work, it sounds like an equitable trade. If
Well, hang on. Let me just jump in here because you just said, that's a tough job. But if you don't have to go out and work, how can being a homemaker be a tough job if it's not a job? That's what I'm
well,
talking about.
I don't well, I didn't mean to describe it like that. It's tough work. It's work. It's not, they're not sitting at home eating bonbons and watching TV. Well, maybe some are, but I think majority of women at that time were doing what they were doing.
right. Yeah. I mean, the reality to me has to do more with the fact that, yeah, if I'm not saying that one is better than the other, what
Right.
I'm saying is I shouldn't be the one making that dictate. I shouldn't be the one. If my sister or my aunt or whoever wanted to be a homemaker, more power to her. If she
Right.
finds a partner who's willing to, like, help with that, and they can go, you run with it, go
Yeah.
nuts. But
Yeah.
if your desire is to be an astronaut, or your desire is to be an airline pilot, or your desire is to be, a physicist. I don't know why I'm going to all those high-end technical things right now. Just
Right. Because you know that women usually don't go for them kind of jobs. Usually.
well, and there's reasons for it, and like I said, some of those reasons have to do with
Well, that's
as elementary school.
that might be a subject for another conversation, because
Dude, I would love to crack it open with you, but like, I always get worried. I always get worried because, like I said, I feel like in the job I do and the work I do,
Mhm.
my job is to sort of give agency to the most that I can, but that doesn't
Right,
mean I get to speak for everybody.
right, right,
There's that difference. I'm not a woman. There are things about the female experience, or the transgender experience, or I mean everything that ain't me,
I got you, I got
that I can only make myself adjacent to. Um, but I understand, like we're talking about at the top of this thing, there are definitely those systems and ideologies that work against them because that's the way power does it. And anyone who wants to argue with that point with me, I'm fine to get into it, but I oftentimes find that folks, like you were saying, they're sort of caught in their own orientation.
you. Hmm.
And my job is to just try to give them perspective. That's all. And I try to do it with humor. I try to do it with a sense of irony. I try to just like actually I'll just real quick, I will tell you this one thing. We were talking about the Rodney King riots.
Right.
One of my shows is a contemporary Black history show called The Movement. And it's basically a 50-year window, 55-year window from the passage of the Voting Rights Act to now. And one of the sketches I had to cut because I just couldn't find a good place for it was I wrote a sketch called Black Rage Tours. And it was basically all based on, like, just imagine like a Fox Business show or CNBC, like a financial channel thing, and they're interviewing this transportation entrepreneur. That's me. And he was like, "You've made this much money, on this transportation line, and it's called Black Rage Tours. How did this come to be?" And basically, I say, "Well, when them riots started breaking out, I was just so upset that all them young black folks was just wrecking our neighborhood. I mean, we live here. We got to think. And so I figured, well, if they're so damn mad at the white people, why don't we just drive them over to the white people? And so I got the church bus and I filled them up and I said, y'all mad at the white people? Come on. And then as I was driving them there, I called the neighborhood we was going to. I called the city hall and I said, listen, I got a busload of 55 angry black folks coming your way. How much will you give us not to show up? And we just started doing that around the country.
I love it.
You'd be surprised how much money people will pay to have a bunch of angry black folks not show up.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, so
you were gonna do it though.
Yeah, but I do it to sort of point out a simple thing, because that was one of the things when it came to all the riots and so on that always got me. Why are we busting up our own stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, it's bad enough that we feel disrespected and degraded and so on, but now we're wrecking the very things that hold us together.
Yeah.
You know, and I was like, okay, if you're gonna be that kind of mad, focus it.
Exactly. Just like I talked about that experience at school. I really didn't get a chance to say anything else after he questioned my ethnicity, but
right.
But,
yeah, and I'm sorry, and I think a lot of people, black, white, otherwise, they just take it for granted that this is the way it is. They see the things they see, and the media is not out there trying to enlighten and inform the way that they should.
No.
A lot of times they're trying to inflame and simplify.
No doubt.
And that's a recipe for just more anxiety. And I want people to understand that, if we treat America like the family we want it to be, the whole house is in a trauma space.
No doubt.
Especially after these last few years between COVID and the racial uprisings and the ethnic, awareness and the women's decisions from the past summer, we have just been on edge for a few years now. Yeah. And so I think a lot of people are living in a kind of trauma space that they're not giving themselves the gravity and the respect and dignity to accept and acknowledge, and thus start to work on healing.
Yeah.
And so that's part of what I feel like I'm trying to do with my work.
Well, we're going to stop it right there, Ron. One final question I want you to expound on is, what do you believe people need to keep in mind in regards to what we've been talking about?
Wow. The simple thing would be literacy. That, as I said earlier, we are all on a spectrum of literacy, going from ignorance at one end to enlightenment at the other. And everybody's on the spectrum. And the minute you think you know a thing about a thing is the minute you start, your dumb ass starts dying.
Yeah, you don't know.
And so we've got to treat people like we want them to understand that we are an adventure in cultural knowledge, whether it's you and me, or whether it's me and you and white people, or whether it's me and you and women. There's so much more to learn from another group than there is to assume you already got figured out. And if we do that, I think a lot of the stuff it starts to get easier, because people then get more curious, people get more engaged, and hopefully they want to build something better with each other.
Sounds like a plan, brother. Well, listen, guys, if you want to get in touch with Ron and talk with him more about diversity, if you want to bring him on for a lecture at your school or your college, you can go to his website. It's this dialoguesondiversity.com.
Yep.
There's a contact form there where you can reach out to him and get that thing done. As always, we're going to end this the same way we started, with a little music. Remember, guys, we're always on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, we're going to start. Yeah. Get that music queued up.
Oh, it's not playing yet? Now I feel like an ass. Sitting here bopping to nothing.
Oh, can't hear it?
I can't. No.
All right. Yeah, we went old school. This is a remix, and we're not going to play it long because we know Facebook likes all this copyrighted stuff. But again, guys, we're on every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Experience JL, the Anti-Guru podcast. Ron, appreciate you coming on. Remember the 3 R's: respect yourself, respect others, and always, always take full responsibility for your actions. All right, we'll see you next week. Later.